Hello, Tridena Nagar, and welcome to our new series, which will be solving Paper 1 Classified Topic 8, Transport in Mammals. And this is going to be Part 2. And before we start, I'd highly appreciate it if you would take a moment out of your very busy day to subscribe to this channel and like this video. And you will find a link with the answer key and the PDF in the description box down below, as well as Part 1. Dear AS Biology students, don't forget to press on our website link in the description box down below, log in into an account and press File Share to receive your free Topic 1, 2, and 3 and 4 notes. Question number 31. The diagram shows a cross-section through a mammalian heart. Which chambers of the heart are represented by G and H? So first of all, take a closer look at the walls of the heart. Now, as you could clearly see, this side is way thicker. Therefore, as we all know, the left side of the heart is more muscular. The reason for this is to generate enough force to push the blood out of the aorta for the rest of the body. Therefore, this must be the left side. And this must be the right side. Therefore, let's see the options that we have here. Now, we have to decide whether this is an atrium or a ventricle. If you look closely, you'll see that the ventricular shape at the bottom is slightly this crescent shape, in contrasting the atrium, which is going to be slightly smaller, something like this, and then there will be the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves. However, we do not see any valves here, as well as we see very, very wide lumens. Therefore, this must be the ventricles, and the answer is going to be D. Question 32. Blood entering the heart from the vena cava passes through or past several structures before entering the lungs. 5 of these structures are included in the list. After arranging these 5 structures in order of blood flow from the vena cava to the lungs, which structure will be third? Now, answering this question is slightly tricky. As we all know, blood from the vena cava moves to the right chamber of the heart into the right atrium. But since we do not have here right atrium, we know that the sinoatrial node is found at the right atrium. So, the right atrium is going to be the sinoatrial node, and it's going to be the first one in our order. Now, as the blood passes the right atrium and the sinoatrial node, here it meets the bundle of His, as you can see here, and the atrioventricular node first, then the bundle of His, then the Purkinje fibers. So here in the list, we have the atrioventricular node. Therefore, this is going to be the second option that we have here. And then the bundle of His until it reaches the ventricle. So here in this option, we do not have the right ventricle. Therefore, the more suitable answer in this case, or the closest answer, is going to be the Purkinje tissue or the Purkinje fibers, since these are found at the base of the ventricles, and therefore when the base of the ventricle contracts, this causes ventricular systole, and then this pushes blood out either to the pulmonary artery, which is on the right side of the heart, or the aorta, which is at the left side. Therefore, the correct answer in this case is going to be Purkinje tissue. Therefore, the answer is going to be B. Question number 33. The bar charts show the quantity of endothelial tissue, elastic tissue, and muscle tissue in the walls of the 3 blood vessels P, Q, and R. Which row correctly identifies the 3 blood vessels? So, let's see the options that we have here. Elastic artery, muscular artery, and vein. From its name, an elastic artery has the highest proportion of elastic tissue. Therefore, here we'll be looking for the bar charts that offers the highest quantity of elastic tissue, and in this case, it's going to be P. Therefore, this seems to be correct. Now, for the muscular artery, from its name, we are looking for the bar chart that has the highest quantity of muscle tissue, and in this case it's going to be Q. And finally, for the veins, they usually have the widest lumen, therefore the thinnest wall, therefore they have the lowest quantity of both the elastic tissue and muscle tissue. Therefore, R is a more suitable answer, and the answer is going to be A. Question 34. The maximum pressure in each of the 4 chambers of a healthy human heart was recorded during one cardiac cycle. The maximum pressures recorded were 3, 10, 25, and 125 millimeter mercury. Which value was recorded for the right ventricle? Now, as we all know, ventricular systole in both chambers. So first of all, we have the left and the right chambers. In both chambers, the ventricular systole must always be the 2 highest numbers. However, we know that the left side of the heart, so the left ventricle, is more muscular to be able to pump blood to the entire body, and in this case is going to have more muscle tissue and is going to be thicker. Therefore, this means that it could generate higher pressure. Therefore, the left ventricle is going to have the highest pressure, and in this case is going to be 120. And now, as I just mentioned, any ventricle must have the 2 highest pressures. In case of the right ventricle, which the question is asking, is going to be the 2nd highest, and in this case is going to be 25 millimeter mercury. And for these two, it's going to be the pressures of the atrium, because the atria generates a very low pressure. The reason for this, it only needs enough pressure to pump blood across to the ventricle at a very short distance. Therefore, they are going to have the lowest pressures, and because we know that the left side of the heart is more muscular, therefore the left atrium is going to be 10 millimeter mercury, and the right atria is going to be 3 millimeter mercury. Question number 35. The graph shows the pressure changes in 3 structures of the right side of the heart during the cardiac cycle. What is represented by the line labeled T? So I'll give you general rules of thumb to help you answer and interpret this graph whenever you see it. Now, here it's a very tricky question. It says the right side of the heart. Now, I'll give you an example to how to interpret it if we were to talk about the left side. So ideally, in the left side of the heart, I'll give you a mnemonic, which is close, open, close, open. This is in both chambers, by the way. So at the bottom here, this represents ventricular pressure and the opening of the atrioventricular valves. So here's the closing of the atrioventricular valve, and here's the opening of the atrioventricular valves. Above, if this were the left side of the heart, this would be the aortic pressure. And that's the opening of the semilunar valve and the closing of the semilunar valve. Now, if this were to be the right side of the heart, now, as we all know, the right ventricle leads off to the pulmonary artery, because it's the right side of the heart. Therefore, this line here would present the pressure, not the aortic pressure, but the pressure changes in the pulmonary artery. Therefore, the only correct answer we have here is going to be A. Question number 36. When active tissues have high carbon dioxide concentrations, oxyhemoglobin needs to release oxygen to the tissues. How is carbon dioxide transported away by the blood from the tissues? 1. As carboxyhemoglobin. Now, this is completely incorrect, because carboxyhemoglobin is when carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin. Therefore, this is incorrect. 2. As carbaminohemoglobin. This is correct. When carbon dioxide binds to hemoglobin, this is carbaminohemoglobin. So this is correct. 3. As hydrogen carbonate ions. So this is also correct, and I'm going to show you how. First of all, when carbon dioxide combines with water, this generates carbonic acid by the action of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. Now this dissociates, forming hydrogen carbonate ions as well as hydrogen ions. Therefore, hydrogen carbonate ions is correct, which leaves the red blood cell. Therefore, 2 and 3 is correct, and the answer is going to be C. Question number 37. Which effect does increasing carbon dioxide concentration have on hemoglobin? So, adding back to our last question, when carbon dioxide increases, it combines with water to form carbonic acid by the action of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. Now what happens is carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen ions and hydrogen carbonate ions. Now what happens is these hydrogen ions combine with hemoglobin, forming hemoglobinic acid. Now this hemoglobinic acid has a really low affinity to oxygen. Having a low affinity, this means that it releases oxygen easier. And binds to oxygen harder. The reason for this is because it has a lower affinity, aka a lower attraction for oxygen. Now let's see the suggestions that we have here. Hemoglobin is less efficient at taking up oxygen. This is correct because it has a lower affinity, and less efficient at releasing oxygen. So this is incorrect. The reason for this is, as I just said, it's more efficient at releasing oxygen because it actually has a lower affinity to it. Therefore, this is incorrect. B. Hemoglobin is less efficient at taking up oxygen and more efficient at releasing the oxygen. Now, this is correct, and the answer is going to be B. Question number 38. What will happen as a result of the blood pressure in the right ventricle becoming higher than the blood pressure in the right atrium? So, when the blood pressure in the right ventricle, or in the ventricle in general, increases than the atrium, what happens is ventricular systole, or systole. This squeezes the blood out of the semilunar valves, either into the pulmonary artery or into the aorta. Now, when this happens, the atrioventricular valves goes shut. The reason for this is the increased pressure. Now, let's assume that this is a chamber of the heart. The increased pressure in the ventricle causes the cusps to shut because they end up filling with blood, the atrioventricular valves. And this is because now the pressure in the atrium is lower. Therefore, the pressure here in the ventricle pushes against the valves, closing them. Now, let's see the suggestions that we have here. A. The semilunar valve in the aorta will close. Now, this is incorrect because here we're talking about the right ventricle. As we all know, the right ventricle leads out to the pulmonary artery. Therefore, it has nothing to do with the aorta, and this is incorrect for B. The semilunar valve in the pulmonary artery will close. Now, this is incorrect. The semilunar valve in the pulmonary artery will open because the pressure in the ventricle is increasing, causes the semilunar valves to actually open of the pulmonary artery, whilst the atrioventricular valves between the atrium and the ventricle shuts. So this is incorrect. C. The left atrioventricular valve will close. Now this is incorrect. And then finally D. The right atrioventricular valve will close. Yes, this is what we're talking about, and therefore the answer is going to be D. Question number 39. The graph shows pressure changes in different parts of the heart during a mammalian cardiac cycle. W, X, Y, and Z indicate when a valve opens or closes. Which are correctly identifies W, X, Y, and Z? So, how to interpret a graph looking like this is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a mnemonic C-O-C-O, or COCO. So, here the valve closes, opens, closes, and opens. Now, a genuine rule of thumb at the bottom here, we're talking about the ventricular pressure and the closing of the atrioventricular valves. So here we're talking about the atrioventricular valves, and above we're talking about the aortic pressure or the semilunar valves. So aortic pressure if we were in the left side of the heart, and pulmonary artery pressure if we were on the right side of the heart. Now, let's see the suggestions that we have here. So, for A, the atrioventricular valve opens. Now, for W, this is incorrect because, as we said, the mnemonic we have is CO. So, actually, the atrioventricular valve closes, doesn't open. Because when the pressure, let's explain this scientifically, when the pressure in the ventricle increases, this is called ventricular systole. Now, when ventricular systole takes place, this causes the atrioventricular valve between the atrium and the ventricles to shut because the increased pressure in the ventricle causes the cusps to fill with blood and then they go shut because the pressure in the atrium is not strong enough to overcome the shutting of the atrioventricular valves in between. Meanwhile, the semilunar valves, because the pressure in the ventricle is increasing, it's strong enough to push the semilunar valves open, leading from the aorta to the aorta or the pulmonary artery. Therefore, the semilunar valve opens here while the atrioventricular valve closes. So we explained this scientifically. Now let's look at X. Now the atrioventricular valve closes. So at X, we're not mentioning atrioventricular valve. At X, we are mentioning the semilunar valves. Therefore, this is instantly incorrect. And this is the correct one because here it opens because of the mechanism that we just explained. Therefore, the answer is going to be B. Question number 40. Which statements are correct? So let's see the suggestions that we have here. 1. Compared with blood, tissue fluid has less protein and no red blood cells. Now, this is correct. The reason for this is that tissue fluid forms by the capillary pores. Now, these capillary pores, let's assume that this is a capillary. Now, these capillary pores are not large enough to let red blood cells through. The function of these capillary pores or the tissue fluid is to provide nutrients as well as oxygen to the tissue or to these cells and to collect the waste materials such as carbon dioxide and urea back inside into the capillary. Now, therefore, this is correct. 2. Lymph may contain lipids, carbon dioxide, and phagocytes. Now, this is correct. For 3. Tissue fluid contains glucose, amino acids, urea, and carbon dioxide. Now, yes, this is correct because it contains glucose, amino acids. This is the nutrients the cells need, and the urea and the carbon dioxide are the waste materials going back inside due to the cell nature and to the waste materials. Therefore, the answer is going to be A. Question number 41. Which statements about the formation of hemoglobinic acid are correct? Now, hemoglobinic acid forms when carbon dioxide combines with water by the action of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. This forms carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen carbonate ions and hydrogen ions. Now, what happens to the hydrogen ions is that it leaves the red blood cells, usually. And then, hemoglobinic acid is formed when hemoglobin combines with hydrogen ions. It forms hemoglobinic acid. Now, the property of hemoglobinic acid is that it has a lower affinity to oxygen. This means that it releases oxygen easier and combines harder with oxygen, aka has a lower attraction to oxygen. Now let's see the suggestions that we have here. 1. It can only occur with the dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin. Now this is correct. The reason for this is I just mentioned that it has a lower affinity, therefore it releases oxygen way easier. 2. It removes excess hydrogen ions, preventing blood from becoming too acidic. Yes, by common sense. When these hydrogen ions, instead of being left in the plasma, combines with hemoglobin, this decreases the quantity of hydrogen ions in the plasma. Therefore, this is correct. 3. It is linked to the action of carbonic anhydrase. Yes, I just mentioned the carbon dioxide combines with water and then forms carbonic acid by the action of the carbonic anhydrase enzyme. Therefore, all 3 of them are correct and the answer is going to be A. Question number 32. What explains how the maximum volume of oxygen is taken up as blood passes through the capillaries of the lungs? Now let's see the suggestions that we have here. A. Each hemoglobin molecule can temporarily bind to 4 oxygen atoms. Now this is incorrect. The reason for this, it binds to 8 oxygen atoms or 4 O2 molecules. So this is incorrect. For B, the dissociation of carbon dioxide from carboxyhemoglobin allows more hemoglobin to be available for binding oxygen. Now this is completely incorrect for 2 reasons. First of all, carboxyhemoglobin is formed by the combination of carbon monoxide, not carbon dioxide, to hemoglobin. This is the first point. Now the second point, actually, the formation of carboxyhemoglobin makes it way harder for oxygen to bind, which explains the carbon monoxide poisoning. So this is incorrect. C. The binding of the first oxygen molecule to hemoglobin decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for binding other oxygen molecules. So this is incorrect. The reason for this is that actually it increases the affinity because binding of one oxygen molecule to the hemoglobin has an allosteric effect. This means the more oxygen molecules binding to hemoglobin, the easier for this the next oxygen molecule to also bind. So it increases the affinity, making it easier for the other oxygen molecules to bind, not harder. Therefore, this is incorrect. D. Oxyhemoglobin formation increases the ability of red blood cells to transport oxygen. This is true because of the allosteric effect of the oxygen that we just mentioned. So the more oxygen molecules that bind to hemoglobin, the easier it is for the next, then the next, until 4 complete oxygen molecules are bound. Therefore, this is correct. Question number 43. The parts of the heart that control heart action are listed. Sinoatrial node, atrioventricular node, and Purkinje tissue. Which row is correct for the atrial contraction and ventricular contractions? So the sinoatrial node initiates excitation of the heart, whilst the atrioventricular node actually delays the excitation 0.1 seconds. The reason for this is that the atrium and the ventricles do not contract at the same time, so it causes a delay. And the Purkinje tissue is like conduction fibers for the conduction from the sinoatrial node to reach at the base of the ventricle for it to contract. Now let's see the suggestions that we have here. Now, atrial contraction. Now, AVN does not produce the wave of excitation, therefore this is incorrect. Now for B, Purkinje tissue carries the waves of excitation. This is correct, it carries it to the base of the ventricle, so ventricular contraction or ventricular systole can take place. Now for C, sinoatrial node and atrioventricular node produce waves of excitation. This is incorrect. The AVN delays it, does not produce it. And finally, the sinoatrial node produces waves of excitation. This is correct. And here, atrioventricular node produces the waves. This is incorrect. And then finally, we have Purkinje tissue carries waves of excitation to the base of the ventricle, so contraction can occur, and the answer is going to be D. Question number 44, the diagram shows part of the circulatory system in a mammal. Where is the blood pressure and the speed of flow the lowest? So, a rule of thumb is that as we go further from the heart, from the aorta, then the capillary, and then the vena cava, or the veins in general, the blood pressure keeps decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. Therefore, the veins are going to naturally have the lowest blood pressure. Therefore, 4 is going to be the lowest blood pressure. Now, for the lowest speed of flow, as we all know, the surface area of the capillaries is very, very large. Therefore, it has the lowest speed of flow. The reason for this, let's link it to how the tissue fluid is formed and how the cells need time to exchange the nutrients, so for oxygen and glucose, to leave the capillary pores through the tissue fluid, and then for the waste materials such as carbon dioxide and urea to come back. This needs time. Therefore, the surface area, as you can see here, of the capillaries offer this time to allow actually time for the substances to exchange between the cells. Therefore, it naturally must have a lower speed of flow. Therefore, 1 is going to be correct and the answer is going to be D. Question number 45. The diagram shows some of the reactions of carbon dioxide when it enters the blood from cells in a metabolically active tissue. Which reaction is catalyzed by the enzyme carbonic anhydrase? So, when carbon dioxide combines with water, carbonic anhydrase has an action here. It converts carbon dioxide and water into carbonic acid. Then carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen carbonate ions and hydrogen ions which leave the red blood cell. Now let's see the suggestions that we have here. Now the first rule of thumb that we must know is that reaction of carbonic anhydrase actually takes place inside the red blood cell. And as we all know, this represents the red blood cell, therefore A and B is going to definitely be incorrect. Now, as I just mentioned, carbon dioxide combines with water and then carbonic anhydrase converts those two products into carbonic acid. Therefore, C is going to be the correct reaction. The dissociation, however, is not directly by carbonic anhydrase, therefore this is incorrect and the answer is going to be C. Question number 46. The graph shows the oxygen dissociation curves for hemoglobin in animals that live at high altitude and animals that live at low altitude. What explains the oxygen dissociation curve at high altitude? Now, when the curve actually shifts to the left, this means that hemoglobin has a higher affinity to oxygen. Therefore, this means that a lower partial pressure is needed for hemoglobin to be at the same saturation. Therefore, this means that at high altitude, hemoglobin has a higher affinity for oxygen. Now, let's see the suggestions that we have here. For A, hemoglobin has a higher affinity to oxygen. Yes, this is correct at high altitude because I just said, because the curve shifted to the left, this means that a lower partial pressure is needed to get saturated at the same percentage as compared to low altitude. Therefore, this is correct. For B, hemoglobin releases oxygen more readily. Now, this is incorrect because this indicates that hemoglobin now has a lower affinity. Lower affinity means that it releases oxygen easier and combines with oxygen way harder, or needs a higher partial pressure of oxygen to combine, which is incorrect. Because, as I just mentioned, here at high altitude, hemoglobin has a higher affinity, not a lower. Therefore, this is incorrect. Now for C, the change in partial pressure of carbon dioxide causes a Bohr effect. Now here we're talking about altitude, and altitudes have nothing to do with Bohr effect. Therefore, this is incorrect. For D, the decrease in percentage of carbon dioxide causes this curve to shift to the left. Now, carbon dioxide and Bohr effect here are not mentioned and not directly linked to altitude. Therefore, both of these are incorrect and the answer is going to be A. Thank you for watching this video and stay tuned for part 3.